Right, here we are. Off to you, Isabel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. Thank you for being here, for taking the time today. This is the third of fourth seminars hosting the projects of the Patient Voices in Research Initiative. This is an initiative that was led by our patient working group. They decided on the research topics. They were part of the panel review, and they were part of research teams. It's an authentic, wonderful initiative, and we are very thankful for that. More information on that was shared by one of the members of the patient working group, James Pereira, on the first seminar, and that there's a recording about that if you want to learn more. But today I just really want to welcome everyone. We will have 3 talks, and we have leadership from all the different consortia, patients, and researchers across the country in this call. So really, really fantastic. And I'll pass it over to Veronique Leblanc, a scientific writer for the network, doing a fantastic job in preparing these seminars and learning all that is happening with these research projects of the network. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Isabel said, we have 3 talks today, so I won't take long. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start. So we will be keeping questions until the end, after all the talks are finished. So if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A, which you can find at the top of your screen with the little speech bubbles, or you can wait until the question period and raise your hand, which you can also find the button for at the top of your screen, and at that point, we'll allow you to unmute and ask your question live. I do want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that I am personally calling in today from Mi'kmaq, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Our network members and our speakers and our attendees today are located all over the country on lands that are home to diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit populations. And I invite everyone here today to honor and pay respects to those peoples and to reflect on the importance of the lands and waters that we all call home today. I also have the distinct pleasure of introducing my co-chair, Sally. Sally is a slightly newer member of the network's patient working group, but she's been with us for a couple of years now, and she's been involved in so many different aspects of the network since joining. So Sally, thank you so much for all the work that you do and that the whole patient working group does, and of course for generously volunteering to co-chair this seminar. So I'll pass it to you if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and get the seminar started.
Thanks, Veronique and Isabel. I am a newer member. I feel very honored to present these projects for which I was not there when this was being birthed. I was there when the prizes were awarded. So it's a great pleasure for me to do this. I'm Sally Nystrom, a Red River Métis citizen, a patient working group member, and a survivor of melanoma with a great quality of life 4.5 years post-diagnosis with no evidence of disease. I know my survivorship is the result of research which enabled new therapies and improvements in standard of care informed by the advancements of precision medicine. What's happening now, and Terry would be so happy about this, we have communities of survivors of many types of cancer. In order that every patient diagnosed in Canada with cancer can receive the best possible care and achieve the best possible results, there are some gaps and considerations that need to be looked at. Today, I'm honored to introduce 3 researchers from 3 parts of Canada who have identified gaps in 3 areas. It gives me great pleasure to introduce these members of the Marathon of Hope Team Canada of Cancer Research. In the past few years, I have learned about disparities in healthcare and the need to close those gaps which are due to race and ethnicity. This is the topic being addressed today by the first team member you'll meet, Dr. Aziz Salawu. Dr. Salawu is a medical oncologist at Mount Sinai Hospital and the Princess Margaret Cancer Center and an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Toronto. He'll tell us about PANORAMA-PRO, the project he led looking at disparities among participants enrolled in precision oncology studies. And now, Dr. Salawu.
Hello, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and to the patient working group and the entire organization for the excellent work you do on the, the support for advancing patient care. So I'm going to share my slides because I have 10 minutes to present our work. Can you see that okay?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay, so our study is called PANORAMA-PRO, and it's a patient-focused evaluation of disparities among participants enrolled on clinical trials and precision oncology studies. We added clinical trials to that because quite often the way of actioning findings from molecular profiling is through clinical trials, and that allows us to develop the medicine a lot more. This study has been very closely supported, not just in terms of funding, but also in terms of design and implementation by the patient working group, and we're very appreciative of that. I lead the study, and my co-investigator is Lindsay Carlson. And the origins of this is that we know that genomic analyses that we use to learn about cancers and treat cancers these days have predominantly relied on reference data from individuals largely of European ancestry. And there's growing evidence that the sociodemographic attributes of patients really influence the molecular characteristics of their cancers and how they behave and how they can be treated. For instance, we have high levels of MMR deficient colon cancers in some parts of Africa, way higher than what we know in Western populations. And a lack of diversity in the precision oncology studies that are performed may result in data that's not generalizable because it's not effective for all populations in the world, as it should be. And it could particularly disadvantage racial and ethnic minorities and also medically underserved communities. So we developed this study to try to collect sociodemographic data from patients who are having treatment at Princess Margaret, because the vast majority of them are potential enrollees on precision oncology studies and clinical trials. But in addition to collecting this data, we wanted to explore their perspectives on the obstacles to participating in these studies and these trials, and also to explore the differences in the molecular characteristics of their tumors if they have them profiled based on their sociodemographic characteristics. So we have this slightly complex workflow, but essentially we enroll patients who consent either electronically or on paper to join the study. And the main part of the study was a collection of demographic data in a questionnaire, using a questionnaire that we developed in a pilot with patient feedback to see how receptive they were to collecting this data and what kind of data they wanted us they were happy to provide. And we also give them the opportunity to participate in semi-structured interviews where we're able to discuss the perceived barriers to enroll on these precision oncology studies and clinical trials. The whole point of this was to identify underrepresented groups of disparities in the populations we enroll on studies, and also to use our qualitative and thematic analyses to identify themes, which we then process with the patient advisory panel at quarterly meetings, and develop overall strategies to overcome the barriers to enrollment in research overall. Our patient advisory panel consists of 5 patient partners who are very excellent people with lived experience and who have worked with advocacy for cancer clinical trials. And we consult with them as we collect the qualitative data from the interviews, and they advise us on the formulation of recommendations. In fact, the final meeting on this project is going to happen in a few weeks' time, and we look forward to that meeting. So we kicked off in early 2025 with a pilot of about 60 participants, and we used the information from this to do some semi-quantitative interviews to actually optimize the sociodemographic questionnaire and make sure that it was working in a way that was that the participants were happy to provide the information and they understood why they were providing the information and weren't just prying into their private lives. And then part 2 was the main part of the study as discussed. This kicked off in early June 2025. And we achieved our target of 500 participants as of April 2026. These semi-structured interviews are ongoing. I think this slide is slightly out of date. I think we're at 27 now. We have just a few more to reach our target of 30. But we already have some very interesting emerging themes. The patient advisory panel, as I described, was convened, and we've had 3 meetings to date evaluating the data, and we're coming up with some interesting policy and clinical recommendations, some of which are already being adopted in our center. This is the overall accrual data, and you can see that our pilot was very helpful because at the end of the day, out of 577 individuals that were approached, 95% were happy to enroll on the study and provide the socio-demographic data and complete the questionnaires. And of these, about 90% were also happy to be interviewed. Of course, we did not interview all of them. We chose specific people from specific socio-demographic groups from whom we wanted to hear about what kind of barriers they could have experienced. And we also looked at the geography, how far they had to travel to come to us to also explore some of those potential barriers. The mean age of our participants was about 58 years. To kind of identify what disparities there are, we wanted to look at the right reference population to compare with. And at Princess Margaret Cancer Center, the closest match to the catchment that we serve in terms of a population is the Toronto Census Metropolitan Area, which is a number of cities around Toronto from which patients routinely commute, including Mississauga, Brampton, and other places on that list, with the map shown there on the right. So we use the 2021 census data for this Toronto Census Metropolitan Area as our denominator, as our kind of reference for the population that we typically serve. And in looking at different categories, one of the questions we asked in our socio-demographic questionnaire was whether patients were born in Canada or whether they immigrated to Canada. And if you look at the graphs on the left there, you can see that, about 61% of patients on Panorama were born in Canada, compared with roughly 50% of people in the Census Metropolitan Area, which suggests that there's a slightly higher proportion of people who were born in Canada and that immigrants are slightly less represented in our population. There was slightly more males in our population as well. And if you then look at the most striking difference that we saw was representation of individuals who identify as being from racialized groups, so essentially non-Caucasian populations. And only 35% of patients who were enrolled on Panorama were identified as belonging to racialized groups, compared with almost 60% in the catchment that we serve. So this suggests that there's an underrepresentation of people from racialized groups who are attending research clinics, including phase 1 clinics at Princess Margaret Cancer Center. And we need to look at ways to close those gaps. Again, this reflects something similar in terms of the racial profile with which people self-identified. As you can see, about 65% identified as European origin, essentially Caucasian. We had 19% identified as Asian, compared with about 40% in the population that we serve, etc. It's also interesting to note that in terms of marital status, whether people had partners, we had a higher proportion compared to the population of patients who were married or had common law partners. This is not surprising because, given the demands of enrollment on these studies and coming to a large academic institution, depending on your geographical location, having a good support system is important. And this is reflected in our interviews, which I will describe shortly. we were quite happy to see that in terms of the level of education, we kind of matched our catchment area quite well. And this was interesting because when we first did this data, we compared with the general population of Ontario, and there was a difference there. But if we look at the closer population to us, it's more matched. We also looked at things like income and employment status. I would say that the patient population we enrolled were probably, in the slightly higher bracket, more than the average income in our area. And in terms of employment, that's a very variable thing because a lot of patients are not currently in work because of the disease that they're going through. Now, moving on to the interviews that we did. Some themes came out, but overall, I think participants had positive perception of clinical trials and precision oncology, but they were aware of some of the inherent uncertainties of treatment, especially if it's on a clinical trial, as well as possible side effects. The main benefits that they saw were about access to treatment, and there was a lot of quotes like, some patients first talked about the idea of giving back, contributing to science, which is very laudable as part of their reasons for doing the clinical trials, but they also think that it's an important way of accessing treatments. But there were some patients who had a lot of anxiety about the unknowns and whether they were making the right decision in enrolling on clinical trials. Patients, in terms of part of their reasoning for why they access clinical trials, there was a strong reliance on oncologists to inform them about trial opportunities. So a lot of them described not knowing very much about clinical trials until they heard from their oncologists. And a subset of participants, shared with us some of the strategies they thought that they went through to try and empower themselves with information regarding trial options and suggesting this to the oncologists, who then subsequently referred them for trials. These participants were often younger patients, highly educated, those who identify as female, and those who have a strong support network. And some of this is reflected in the sociodemographic data that we collected as well. There was a lot of discussion about some of the burdens and the challenges of trial participation or coming downtown for participation in precision oncology studies, including travel and the associated expenses of travel, as well as time away from work. There's a growing population of younger people with family and working lives who have cancers. And some of these burdens were discussed in detail. We're currently working on strategies to try and see how we can alleviate those burdens or make it easier for patients to realize that there are some programs in place to try and alleviate these burdens. In terms of our next steps, as I said, we're working with our patient advisory panel to formalize recommendations, which we'll present to research leadership in our institutions and far and wide. We're also going to be aligning with currently existing projects, including a virtual trials pathway that we have called Virtuoso, which is led by Lindsay Carlson. What this focuses on is engaging with community groups and community referrers in neighboring institutions who often refer patients down for clinical trials to meet patients when they are likely to require precision oncology assessment and clinical trial matching. And we're working on expanding our research partnerships with an expansion that is imminently going to open in Montreal, in Quebec, very shortly. I would first and foremost like to thank all the participating patients and their relatives for providing this data very generously and for talking to us, as well as the patient advocates on our patient advisory panel. Thank you to MOHCCN and the patient working group for funding this research. I have a list of my co-investigators who have all been very keen to allow us to approach their patients, and the study staff without whom we couldn't have done any of this. And we also get some support from the Gilead Hope program. And one last thing, I'm going to have to show a picture of Lindsay Carlson because she's very key to this project. But in terms of our follow-on work with the virtual patient navigation as well. She leads that program and she does it very well. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you, Dr. Salawu. Equitable access to healthcare for all Canadians is an important goal, and your work is leading to that. Survivorship and living well is another important topic to people diagnosed with cancer, and this is what our next team member, Dr. Robin Urquhart's project is about. Dr. Robin Urquhart is an associate professor and Canadian Cancer Society endowed chair in population cancer research at Dalhousie University and an affiliate scientist with Nova Scotia Health. Dr. Urquhart also co-leads the Atlantic Cancer Consortium. Today, she will be telling us about the project she led entitled Co-Designing an Intervention to Support People Living with and Beyond Metastatic Cancer Diagnosis. Robin and Sarah, you'll both be speaking today?
Yeah, I can present Sarah. We didn't update everyone on that. Thank you very much, Sally. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I am going to co-present today with Sarah Scruton. So Sarah is Research Coordinator Extraordinaire. She's been working in my program for a long time now, also did her master's with me and was really focused on equity issues in ovarian cancer and ovarian cancer outcomes. And I know she's worked on another of the Patient Voices funded projects as well. And so many of you may know her, probably know her. I was just going to acknowledge as well, and I know Veronique did this earlier, but I live and work in Mi'kma'ki as well, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And so this research was led out of this part of our land, of our country, and you know, some folks don't know, I think, how big Mi'kma'ki is. So just for people on the line, Mi'kma'ki includes all of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, part of New Brunswick, the Gaspé region of Quebec, a part of Maine, and a big part of southwestern Newfoundland. So it's actually a large region. Okay, so we'll start. Sarah, can you just go to the next slide? So the background is here. All I really want to say here is that, you know, I've been spending a big part of the last 20 years, I think I started in 2026, really being interested in and researching and investigating issues around survivorship. And that's largely been around sort of more early stage cancer populations and cancer groups. And so doing a lot of work understanding their needs and experiences after treatment and as they transition to well follow-up care, and certainly designing and testing a lot of supports and interventions. And alongside of all of that, of course, we have this really, you know, growing community of people who are living long-term with their diagnosis, not necessarily sort of, you know, after the treatment is done and disease-free. And so I've sort of seen how that's happened over the years, and all of the people that I've worked with, patient partners and family partners and so on in this space have been, you know, I've realized, and we've had many discussions around how a lot of the supports we've built, which work really well for some people, may not always work that well for people who are, you know, living long-term with their disease. So that's the background here. We really don't have a great understanding of the challenges from a research perspective of those that live long-term with their cancer and how they might differ from people who are, you know, are treated with curative intent, and what supports we need to put in place to really meet these needs. So that's the background. Sarah's going to talk about methods and results, and I'll jump in again later. So go ahead, Sarah.
All right. So based on these knowledge gaps, the goal for our study was firstly for us to begin to understand the experiences of those individuals who are living with a metastatic cancer diagnosis, and to reveal how this differs from those earlier stage or post-treatment populations. And so we did this by conducting interviews with 22 individuals across Canada who were receiving ongoing treatment for advanced cancer. Secondly, we also wanted to identify gaps in the health system and within supportive care to inform priority areas for intervention development and ultimately to begin to co-design an intervention. So during the interviews, we asked the participants to describe the supports that were missing that they wish they would have had access to. And then in phase 2, we narrowed down these priority areas and we brought them forward to our final phase. And here we brought together patients, researchers, and healthcare providers to 3 workshops, and we began the process of co-designing 2 interventions to be tested in the future that will hopefully address these priority areas. So for this project, we were lucky enough to have 3 patient partners who were engaged as members of our research team and who were actively involved throughout the entire study process. So they helped from conceptualizing the study and preparing the grant to developing our study materials, such as our interview guides and our recruitment methods, as well as helping us to reach potential participants themselves. Once we did the interviews, I was able to work closely with them during the analysis to ensure that the interpretation of the findings accurately reflected patient perspectives and experiences. And then they helped not only to plan our co-design workshops, but took time to attend and engage in the co-design process. And we were also very grateful to the members of the Marathon of Hope patient working group who helped us to both identify the priority areas and were also involved in the co-design process. So during the interviews, the majority of the discussion revolved around challenges adjusting to living life with an advanced cancer diagnosis. And although many of the specific needs that they experienced were common amongst any cancer type or stage, like fatigue or anxiety, the difference was them grappling with the fact that many of these challenges will continue to impact them for as long as they're on treatment, and therefore likely for the rest of their lives. But by far the largest topic of discussion was the emotional toll that these adjustments took, as the participants described having to balance fears of their cancer spreading with hope that it would continue to be managed with effective treatments. And so this, of course, made it difficult to plan for an uncertain future. And the participants also all described instances where they were no longer able to do things that they could before, whether this be work, exercise, or hobbies. And this, of course, had a significant impact on their well-being, and as some described, caused them to develop a new or revised sense of self. We also asked if anything made it difficult for them to address these challenges, and they described issues accessing available supports and having to find resources on their own or pay out of pocket. Often the supports that they did access were not effective for their needs, or they weren't eligible to take part. Sometimes supports were only offered short term, and sometimes they just weren't useful. So for example, there were times where the participants felt that they were too well for metastatic cancer specific supports that tended to be geared towards individuals who were nearing the end of life, but they also felt too sick for supports that were aimed at reintegrating back into life after treatment. So we asked these individuals to think about supports that they wish they would have had access to throughout their experience. And we were able to identify 12 priority areas, which were then narrowed down to 5 to bring forward to the 3 co-design workshops. So this included financial planning and support, a one-stop shop informational resource, healthy living supports, caregiver and family supports, as well as tailored mental health services. When we brought these priority areas to the co-design workshops and we asked the participants to begin brainstorming intervention ideas within them that we could begin to develop, a clear message came up pretty quickly. And it wasn't that the participants felt that we needed more supports, but instead we needed to address the fact that these supports do exist, but they're fragmented and they're hard to find and they're not designed for people living long-term with advanced cancer. So instead, we pivoted and 2 key interventions were developed. The first is continuing professional development for healthcare providers. And this is to address the fact that interventions and supports are not typically designed for these individuals. And therefore, the providers who are in charge of offering them must be equipped with the knowledge and skills to support this population whose needs differ from those who have completed treatment. Before we can develop this intervention, we do need to understand where the knowledge gaps lie. But just as an example, this might include an education program for improving an exercise therapist's knowledge of the long-term physical challenges, or a mental health practitioner's knowledge of the process of adjusting to a metastatic diagnosis. While that needs assessment and knowledge gap is identified, we are working towards developing the second intervention that we co-designed, which is a personalized navigation program for those with advanced cancer. Rather than once again creating new services, this intervention would focus on helping patients access what already exists. So the participants talked about how a program like this needs to be offered in a flexible, stepwise way that adapts to their needs as they change over time. So this might be basic information and resource directories offered online for someone who has fewer needs, all the way to person navigation support for someone with more severe needs. They also stress the importance of the program being available from the point of diagnosis and all the way throughout the cancer trajectory, so that patients are given just-in-time access rather than experiencing delays to getting the help when they need it. So we're currently working on turning these interventions into something that will be pilot tested in the future, but we hope that they both address the two key system gaps that we identified, which are really improving providers' ability to deliver and connect patients to tailored supportive care, and make sure that patients are not left to navigate a complex and fragmented system on their own. And I'm going to pass it back to Robin.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. So I think just a minute left or so. Essentially, in the more short term, in the more immediate, we're in the process, and I think there's a slide next around few next steps, but in developing this patient navigation program that, again, will be tailored and personalized to people to meet them where they are, and to provide the level of care that they need or support that they need at that time. So again, a stepped approach to navigation, which is a bit different than many of the navigation programs that are out there right now. And the other is, again, this continuing professional development intervention to improve provider understanding of patient needs within this community, and to make sure that they have the knowledge to be able to tailor supports and services to their needs. Future impact. So I think the one thing I'll say here is that we actually identified 12 priority areas, and through this one-year grant, we narrowed it down to 2 that we're developing. Oh my goodness, there's a whole lot of information we got within those 12 priority areas that I think we can develop interventions for all of them. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and we're looking at collaborating with a lot of folks now to be able to do this. Next slide. So right now, we are working with folks across the country, including members of our existing team, and people with lived experience, patient and family partners. And we're bringing in we're connecting with folks across the country who have similar interests or similar programs in some way, in terms of developing or trying to think about developing and designing navigation programs for people who are living long-term with their cancer, and that are more tailored and provide that tailoring. As Sarah said, we will be pilot testing this program to examine feasibility and effectiveness. And at the same time, we're starting to develop a needs assessment to actually guide the development of a training intervention for healthcare providers. Next slide. I think for the network, I just wanted to say a few things, and the words are here. Everyone will have this can have the slide deck or see the seminar. But I think as we think about precision oncology and more people having access to these wonderful diagnostics and therapies, and being able to get sort of personalized treatment, we really need to think about navigation in that context. And I think navigation is going to be critical to help people live well, to navigate the services and supports they want, including therapies, and then supports to manage side effects of therapies and so on, and then to live well as they live long-term with their cancer. And I think that's in particularly important as the network itself begins to engage more underserved communities, more rural communities, remote communities, and different patient populations. And of course, workforce training. As we start to roll out more and more precision oncology, it's not just the medical oncologists who need to know what's happening, right? I envision a really strong need for workforce training, particularly in primary care, as more and more people are on these therapies. I'm going to stop there, but next slide, Sarah. I just want to acknowledge, I just want to acknowledge everybody who took part in this study, the members of the Marathon of Hope Cancer Centers Network Patient Working Group. I shouldn't even have to read that off. I should be able to say it without reading it, for really taking their time and being a part of this. And of course, the Marathon of Hope and Terry Fox Research Institute for supporting this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin and Sarah. This is indeed a crucial project, a crucial patient-focused project to help close gaps for those living with and beyond an advanced cancer diagnosis, and with some good recommendations there for how to move forward. Thank you. Our final team member to speak today, Dr. Helen McTaggart-Cowan, is an assistant professor of professional practice in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University and a scientist with BC Cancer. Today, she'll be telling us about the project she led, exploring stakeholder perspectives about biomarker testing in advanced ovarian cancer. We'll learn about the gaps existing in this area. Dr. McTaggart-Cowan, sorry.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present the work that this wonderful initiative funded. So today's work, the study really explores how different interest holders understand and experience the use of homologous recombination deficiency, or HRD testing, in the context of advanced ovarian cancer. HRD testing is increasingly important in precision oncology. It helps patients who are more likely to benefit from targeted therapies. However, implementing this testing in real world is complex and political, and depends not only on the science, but how patients, healthcare providers, and health systems engage with it. So in this work that I'm going to present today, we will focus on understanding those perspectives on how better to inform HRD testing and how it can be integrated into routine care to ensure that it's both effective and equitable. To set the stage, ovarian cancer is among the most common cancers in Canadian women. Approximately 3,000 women are diagnosed with ovarian cancer annually. High-grade serous ovarian cancer is one of the most common types of ovarian cancer. So we do know that mutations in the BRCA1/2 gene can increase the risk of developing ovarian cancer because these genes play an important role in repairing damaged DNA. BRCA mutation characters with a high-grade serous ovarian cancer is about 22%. Most high-grade serous ovarian cancer tumors demonstrate this deficiency in homologous recombination, or HRD, meaning that cancer cells have difficulty repairing DNA damage effectively. And this deficiency, HRD, is present in about half of those with high-grade serous. So this is a really important area because HRD testing can provide us with valuable diagnostic and predictive information. So specifically, it helps us identify those patients who are more sensitive to treatment with PARP inhibitors. And these medications help target cancer cells with impaired DNA repair pathways. So with this testing, we can identify the presence of HRD biomarkers, and that can help guide specialized treatment plans. So niraparib is a type of PARP inhibitor, and it is intended to delay the progression or recurrence of ovarian cancer. Now, patients with a proficient HRD, so HRD negative status, if they take a PARP inhibitor, they may or very often experience high toxicity related to the treatment, experience extreme adverse events such as nausea, vomiting, and fatigue. They also have very minimal clinical benefits, such as a very little time since progression-free survival. Currently, and quite recently, FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, no longer recommends niraparib as the maintenance treatment option for those who are identified to be HRD negative. So HRD testing is really important to help patients, their families, and their medical team make informed decisions about their treatment plan. Now, HRD testing isn't publicly funded in Canada. The only province that has HRD testing available for free for their patients is in the province of Saskatchewan. But more provinces are becoming enabling HRD testing for free. So what we do know that different stakeholder perspectives, including patients, healthcare providers, can really influence whether and how new technologies are adopted. However, these perspectives haven't been fully formalized and synthesized in the context of HRD testing in ovarian cancer. So it's really important to understand these perspectives, to understand the barriers and facilitators from different viewpoints, especially in improving implementation. So the project entails four phases. The first phase is really to look at the current knowledge of views of HRD testing, not only in ovarian cancer, but all cancer. Next, we use that knowledge to help us really understand the knowledge, attitudes, and experience of patients and clinicians regarding HRD testing in the area of advanced ovarian cancer. Then taking both phases, phase 1 and 2, we took that knowledge and really used that to inform our knowledge translation event, where we shared our findings and had dialogue with other interest holders to co-develop research priorities for future work. And now we're in the next final phase where we're going to take that research forward. I wanted to stop here and talk about the 3 patient partners that were involved throughout the whole study. We had 3 partners that were recruited through Ovarian Cancer Canada that really helped us along the way. We had 1 patient partner at the time of application who helped us inform the project, idea and study plan. And when the project was funded, we had 2 more partners join, and they were instrumental along the way in really sharing their experiences, making sure that the patient voice was brought throughout the whole design. They were instrumental in all patient-facing documents, including the interview guide and any resources that were shared throughout, and really helped with the recruitment strategy. I'm just going to touch upon each of the 3 components so that you have a flavor of what was done, but I do recognize that there is a 10-minute limit, so I'll just touch upon them briefly. So the first phase was a narrative review where we looked at different studies that reported on different views, perceptions, and experiences with HRD testing across all different types of cancers. With the help of a research librarian, we identified 15 studies that covered both healthcare providers and patient perspective. And the most common facilitator that was reported was that perceived benefit of HRD testing to inform treatment decisions. Patients emphasize the importance of provider recommendation in their decision to undergo testing. And barriers that were reported included lack of healthcare provider knowledge, limited access to testing, inconsistent clinical guidelines, financial concern, and low patient awareness. Overall, we concluded that patients and health providers recognize the value of HRD testing in Canada, but the uptake was HRD testing in cancer care, but uptake was limited due to informational and structural barriers. And we do recognize that there needs to be efforts in improving access and implementation, and this could be done by development of standardized guidelines, provider and patient education, and policy strategies to ensure this equitable access. I do want to just point out that just this week, our narrative review was accepted for publication, so I'm really happy to share that, and hopefully in a very near future, I'll be able to share the findings in a link to the community. So the results from the narrative review, along with our patient partners, really inform the interview guide, which was the focus of the study. The interviews were conducted all of last summer and into the fall. And we really wanted to make sure that we had pan-Canadian representation in exploring the knowledge and attitudes and experience of HRD testing in the area of advanced ovarian cancer. We conducted 20 interviews with patients residing across Canada, and these patients had a range of HRD status. So some of them had HRD positive, some were negative, and some had inconclusive results. In addition to the 20 patient interviews, we had 12 medical oncologists and gynae oncologists participating as well, and we had representation across Canada. So I did present some of these findings in Winnipeg last fall, but these are our final results. We did identify that the knowledge and experience of HRD testing really had two main factors, really in regards to the test itself, as well as the test results. So I'll just focus on the left-hand side here on the test results. Patients and healthcare providers really saw the value, the convenience of the HRD testing. It was easy, it was accessible. Patients didn't have to go in for another biopsy. They can use existing samples. And providers really saw it being quite easy in that patients just had to complete another form to get this testing. So it was quite seamless for many participants. However, the seamlessness also, when we looked a little deeper, this seamless range in terms of too seamless and not seamless enough. Looking at these quotations here, some patients were not even aware that HRD testing was done on their tissue. This quotation on the top said, "I didn't know HRD was a separate test to BRCA1/2 testing." So more information was needed for this for some of the patients. Now, the quotation below is from a healthcare provider. This person really wanted it to be automated, HRD testing to be automated, so that every high-grade serous ovarian cancer patient gets HRD testing reflexively, so that there wasn't going to be any delay. It wasn't going to be any errors. It would just be done automatically. So in terms of the test results, we did see that many participants had underlying views of niraparib. For many patients, the view of niraparib was quite positive. That extra chance of time to achieve personal milestones, spend time with their family. So the quotation on the bottom left here says, even if niraparib was 2% more, I would have gone on it to at least extend my time. So there's no recognition of the side effects if they are indeed HRD negative. Now on the right-hand side in the bottom is a clinician quotation. And this clinician talks about quality of life. So that trade-off between quality and quantity of life is quite mismatched between the patient and the provider point of view. So finally, test results really helped inform decision-making, inform both patients and healthcare providers in making the informed decision on their next treatment plan. So the top quotation here is from a patient. "I really need whatever information I can have to make that decision." That need to be empowered, that need to be to have that autonomy to know if they're making the correct decision for themselves. And the bottom quotation here is, how important is the test results in identifying that HRD status? So this is from a healthcare provider. "We don't know which patient would actually really benefit from niraparib or not without the results from the HRD test." So we took the findings from both the narrative review and the interviews to really inform the next steps. So we conducted a knowledge exchange event in February where we invited back past participants, patients who have direct experience with HRD testing, other high-grade serous ovarian cancer patients, and clinicians to really engage with the work that we did, have further dialogue, as well as help co-design that next research steps. So after the discussion, we've identified two main types of priorities: communication and information priorities, as well as advocacy and access priorities. So just focusing on the left in terms of the communication and information priorities, we do see that there is that need, that standardized need of communication from clinicians in sharing back the knowledge for their patients. That need for transparency regarding current status of HRD testing and niraparib use in Canada. Need for clinician education sessions, and that need for patients' ability to talk to other healthcare provider about HRD testing and niraparib use. So there's that need for consistent information, equitable information across all provinces and territories. Now, looking on the right here, we are looking at the advocacy and access priorities. There's a need for free and accessible HRD testing, a need for improved ovarian cancer research, need for trusted educational resources in Canada, and a need for a comprehensive guidebook. So we took those priorities that were co-created with our attendees to share back, or even take it a little further. We developed a survey to be shared with other researchers, other medical professionals in the area of advanced cancer to see if we can identify what is the next step that we should really embark on. So these were the three main priorities that were identified. Not surprisingly, a need for free, accessible HRD testing for all of patients in Canada, a need for improved ovarian cancer research, and a need for clear and standardized communication. That was just really rung through. So in terms of future directions that we are going to move forward on is that we are going to continue lobbying for free and accessible HRD testing across Canada. We've already started communication with Ovarian Cancer Canada and sharing our evidence to really support that drive. We really continue centering patient voices in advanced ovarian cancer research and continue to prioritize research initiatives in this area. We have plans to meet as a team in the coming months to really look at that next step and how we can propel the work that we've done here forward. So I conclude with our acknowledgement slide. I do want to thank everyone on the team. It's been a wonderful experience. I do want to have a specific shout out to our patient partners, Elena Eisenberg, Donna Pepin, and Krista Wood for all their efforts. And I do want to thank the Patient Voices Research Initiative for the funding this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was a great presentation. All three were really. So we have a bit of time for questions. We have had some come through in the chat, and I know there are a few hands up. Maybe I'll start with, there was a bit of a discussion in the chat after Aziz's presentation about whether you considered looking at knowledge and availability of clinical trials navigators. Dora mentioned the clinical trials navigator program led by Dr. Carolyn Ham at Windsor Regional Hospital. Aziz, any thoughts on that?
Yes, thanks so much. Those are excellent questions. Lindsay is actively working along those lines, and she actually had a very useful meeting with Caroline Ham at the CCTG Spring meeting just a couple of weeks ago. And, there's a lot of excitement and collaboration. In terms of our, virtual navigation pathways already, we're collaborating with some hospitals already. Southlake has already opened a patient navigation program, and we share some patients already, which is great. And, our plan is to continue to expand this because we think it's very important. We're also looking at some strategies to provide, information in waiting rooms in community hospitals that will let us do that, about what it actually involves. That do you know that you can get reimbursed for some of your travel to centers where you can access clinical trials and precision oncology and things like that, things that patients may not necessarily know. They just know that, it's a long way to go, etc. And also looking at ways that we can get the research to patients wherever they are, such as self-referral for precision oncology initiatives, telemedicine, although that's a taller obstacle to overcome in terms of getting our clinical trials to be able to happen where patients receive treatments in satellite centers and not just all in one center. But, these are all ongoing efforts from our perspective. Thanks for those very useful comments. And, we're always happy to hear about more places that we're not aware of, so that we can continue to enhance our collaboration. Thanks.
All right, that's great to hear. Thank you. Denis, I see you have your hand up. You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask your question.
Sorry, Véronique, mes excuses. I just didn't know how to lower my hand.
Well, that's
so. But anyway, thanks to the speaker. They were all very good. I enjoyed the result, and I think it's going to be very useful and informative for us, the patient partners, in the next phase of our program or our initiative. So thank you very much.
Merci, Denis. Stacy, you should also be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks to all three speakers. These were excellent presentations. Hi, Robin, it's nice to see you again. My question's for you, actually. I was wondering across your themes if different gaps or priorities were identified across different cancer groups. So for example, some of the themes identified in, say, like AYA cancers versus early onset cancers might be different or not. And I think if they're not, that's really telling too.
So that's a great question. So Sarah, step in if you have more to add. I would say that our age group for here, that's a great question. I'm gonna comment on the AYA because our age group was older. And so the range, I was just bringing up the numbers here, the range of our participants in the interviews was 40 to 81. So we didn't technically get AYAs and even up to 39. And so this really is and so that's a great, like, thinking about presenting further and publishing the work. That's a great comment. And then I'm bringing up the cancer types in our interviews. So breast, multiple myeloma, melanoma, lung, ovarian, and prostate. And I would say there weren't major differences across those cancer types. And we did a prior study specific to lung. That was very similar to this, sort of a bit of a pilot study that we did, and it was just lung patients. And what we found out of this study really mirrored what we found just from lung cancer as well. So with a mixed cancer population, I guess. So very similar, and some of it is not that different from what I've heard from years for people post-treatment who have no evidence of disease, right? A lot of fragmentation of the system and a lack of coordination and difficulty accessing these services. So many of those things were the same, but I think there's some nuances here. One is certainly that, a higher symptom burden because of ongoing treatments, that sort of unique place to be in where, you sort of, the fear of progression, right? Like at some point this is probably, going to progress, and when's that going to happen, and so on. And I see the higher symptom burden and lower functioning at certain times, and so that makes it really hard to manage day-to-day activities. And I would say that that's different from, like, a bit different, or at least a bit more of a higher need than I would see in a more well follow-up care population. And the other thing was just that a lot of the services and supports that are in place now just are not tailored for people living long term. So you can imagine, I mean, lots of descriptions I can think about, but you could even imagine exercise programs, right? If you're in an 8-week exercise program with the intention to help you sort of, transition after treatment and get back, and to reintegrate and so on. Well, that 8 weeks may not work as well for someone who's living long-term with their condition. Or, programs across the country, people talked about maybe around some mental health supports or other things where it was sort of like you get 1 or 2 visits and that's it. That's all the program is. And that doesn't work for people who are living years with their disease. So I hope I answered it. I felt like it was very common, but we didn't have AYAs, which is a really good point. But certainly across those cancer types, very common. And some things common with more well populations, but not all. if that makes sense.
But you did have early onset though, right? With like the younger age groups though. So that matters too.
Yep. Yes,
I think
this was yeah.
I think that two-pronged approach with providers and support services that you're looking at is critically important as well, because I think sometimes, oncologists probably think that supportive care, if you have a program like that in place at your cancer center, is covering all those bases, right? And so, and then they focus on care, right?
Yeah, it was interesting, going through all of these transcripts, and then in the co-design workshops, when people talked about their experience of going to sort of get a dietitian, for example, being referred for nutrition advice, and a dietitian saying to them, like, I don't have the knowledge in this area. Like, what you're asking for is different than what I'm used to when people are, what I mean, and a different population, and being told that they just don't have the knowledge. And so I think it is really important. Because obviously around precision oncology and precision therapies, there's a certain group of people like, medical oncologists in particular and hematologists and so on who are getting this knowledge. But then when you broaden it out to the whole care team, who have limited knowledge, and then not just about the therapy, or the actual targeted therapy or the immunotherapy, but all the side effects that come along with it. And then all of the emotional and psychological burden and day-to-day burden and so on. So I think it's a hard thing to crack, I guess, but I do think it's really, really important that we need to start develop these training programs.
Okay, thank you for that. I know we're a couple minutes past and we've seen a few people drop off. I'll just ask one quick question of Helen. So Dr. Nicole Beauchemin, who was a former co-chair of the patient working group, she unfortunately couldn't make it today, but she was really a driving force behind this initiative, and she sent me a few written questions. So I'll ask one for Helen. I think it essentially boils down to, have you reached out to any pharmaceutical companies to talk about your results? And, in your presentation, you mentioned the advocacy piece and how that came up a lot. And in terms of testing, do you think there's anything that that can be done there with pharmaceutical companies to help push that forward?
That's an excellent question. Just checking if I'm on mute. And I hadn't really thought about that. Just sometimes as researchers, we just don't think of that as the first point, but now I think that's an excellent suggestion that I will push forward on that. So I please report back and say I really thank her for her suggestion.
We'll do that. Thank you so much. Okay, I know we have more questions, but we're a few minutes over time, so I think we'll have to wrap it up there, and perhaps we can follow up in writing with some of the other teams. So thank you so much to all the presenters today. Those were 3 fantastic talks. Thank you for your projects. This is really important work, and it was really great to hear from you. Thank you also so much to Sally for co-chairing this session and reminding us why this is also important. With that, we have part 4 of this series happening next week. So another 3 presentations to round everything out. I put a link in the chat at the beginning of the meeting. I hope many of you can join us next week. If not, they will also be recorded. And thank you very much for joining us. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.